My obsessive thought spirals go in very different directions and have very different sources. And for me, that's why O comes first in the diagnosis OCD, is because the obsessive thoughts are the beginning, and then the compulsive behaviors, the checking, the wanting to reassure oneself, etc., that comes second as a way to try to manage those obsessive worries. And it's terrifying, and I will do anything to stop feeling it. I will do whatever I need to do to calm myself down, because I am so scared when I'm in the thick of that. And that's why for years I would lose 6 or 8 hours a day, every day, to checking behavior, because it was the only way that I could calm myself down at all. It was the only way I could live in the world. I could have written a bunch of books in the time that I spent Googling and just having to live with those thoughts. They're so freaking loud. And I just felt powerless before them. It really did feel like I wasn't the captain of the ship of my consciousness.
I'm Tia Wilson with NOCD, and I am here with bestselling author John Green.
Hi, Tia.
Hello, it's good to be here with you.
Yeah, OCD sufferer to OCD sufferer.
OCD sufferer to OCD sufferer. We want to give everyone just a baseline understanding of what OCD is, what treatment looks like, and why there is hope.
Well, I think a lot of times people associate OCD with being very organized or having strong opinions or needing or wanting things to be a certain way. That's very different from the debilitating disorder that I experience. I mean, for one thing, I'm not very organized, and I don't care if my Pepsis are all in a line. Now, some people do, and for some people that can be a really devastating part of their OCD experience. For me, my obsessive thought spirals go in very different directions and have very different sources. Sometimes I'll develop an obsessive fear, for instance, that I have cancer, and I'll have pain on the outside of my knee, and I'll convince myself that that's osteosarcoma, and I'll spend a lot of time, hours and hours every day checking resources to try to confirm that I don't have osteosarcoma, but I can never quite close that loop of my fear. I can never quite reassure myself enough through checking behavior. And so I just keep checking and checking and checking and checking. Or it might be very different. I might develop some kind of like relational OCD, where I become convinced that someone's about to break up with me, or that someone secretly hates me. And I'll constantly do checking behavior, check in and, hey, do you hate me? Are you sure you don't hate me? Approach it from lots of different. And for me, that's why O comes first in the diagnosis OCD, is because the obsessive thoughts are the beginning, and then the compulsive behaviors, the checking, the wanting to reassure oneself, etc., that comes second as a way to try to manage those obsessive worries.
Yeah, no, you perfectly described that cycle and just how vast those obsessions can be. It can grab onto anything in your life, right? It does not discriminate. It does not choose the things you wish it would. It always chooses the things that are most important to you, that usually hurt the most.
Yeah.
And so we want to do those things to get rid of it. It's so distressing to think someone might break up with me, that you feel this urgency to need to reassure yourself that they won't, right? Or feels so distressing to you that you might get cancer, that you want to make sure that that isn't what's happening, right?
Exactly. And OCD is unusually good, I think, at finding the places where, just as you said, there's something that's really important to us. And there's something that if it happened, it would be really distressing and really difficult to deal with. And OCD says, oh, perfect. That's what I've been waiting for.
Right. Well, and the interesting thing about that is it's because those are the only thoughts we engage in. Like if you sat here and told me I had purple hair and you hated it, I wouldn't do anything, because I don't know that that's not true. It doesn't really bug me.
Right.
If you said, oh, I hate your orange hair, it might hurt my feelings more, right? Because there's some sort of valence to that that makes me want to engage.
There has to be some level of, not truth, but valence is a great word to it, in order for me to not be able to close the loop on that thought. So if somebody says, I don't like your purple hair, I can be like, well, that was weird.
Okay.
And I can let that thought go immediately.
You wouldn't label it probably even as intrusive. It just would be something that happened.
Right. But if somebody says, I don't like your increasingly gray hair, well, on a couple levels, that's difficult for me.
Right.
And now maybe it becomes a little bit of an intrusive thought. But for me, the really intrusive thoughts are, my knee hurts
Yeah.
And my knee continues to hurt because I'm 47 years old and knees hurt sometimes when you're 47.
Right.
And then I convince myself that this might be something very, very serious. This might be something life-threatening. This might take away the most important relationships in my life. This might devastate the people I love. And then I'm in that obsessive thought spiral. Then I'm in a place where it's really hard to walk away from it. We all have strange thoughts that just pass through our minds, right? But the problem with OCD is that strange thought passes through your mind and it gets stuck. And I compare it sometimes to a snowstorm. There's this wonderful Edna St. Vincent Millay poem where she says, it's about depression, but she says, 3 flakes, then 4 appear, then many more. And that feeling of, this one thought passes through, and then maybe it's 2 thoughts, and maybe it's 3 thoughts, and then many more. And it's just this blinding white blizzard of thought, of fear. And that is really, really difficult. That is really, really difficult to deal with and can be debilitating.
Yeah.
And you've experienced that. I mean, you weren't able to leave your house for a long time.
Right. Yeah, no, it had completely, I like to say OCD shrinks your world the more you give into it, right? Because it just keeps telling you the threats are so urgent. And so you do the safety behaviors, you do the compulsions until those compulsions start to take away your autonomy and your freedom on a day-to-day basis. And I think that is something people really misunderstand about OCD. You mentioned, what did you say? Organizing Pepsi bottles? I don't know what you said. You said something about organizing. And I think even the people who do have some sort of like symmetry obsessions, which, I did, or, are worried about organization, even then it's not fun, right? It is this dizzying blizzard that you're in. And you can feel completely lost in that. It's really, it's great when we're able to lay out. You have the obsession, you have the intrusive thought, and then it causes you distress, so you do a compulsion, right? But when you're in the middle of those thoughts, you're not usually having that level of insight, especially before therapy, to label what's happening.
Right.
How does that feel? Like, how do you describe that sensation, aside from just the clinical language? What does it feel like to be in that blizzard?
To me, it just feels terrifying. It just feels very, very real. It feels as real as everything else that's real, and it's terrifying. And I will do anything to stop feeling it. I will do whatever I need to do to calm myself down because I am so scared when I'm in the thick of that. And that's why for years I would lose 6 or 8 hours a day, every day, to checking behavior because it was the only way that I could calm myself down at all. It was the only way I could live in the world. And as you say, over time, it gets worse. It gets more and more serious. Your world gets smaller and smaller. You lose more and more time to this. And the fear, the intensity of the terror is as intense as anything I've ever experienced. And I've lived through some things.
Yeah.
But it is really, really difficult to live with.
Yeah. I heard you say terror, fear.
Yeah.
If I can add in like doom is sometimes a feeling I feel. I also shame and guilt. I think people sometimes limit OCD to the anxiety, but it's no longer classified as an anxiety disorder because it can come with any emotion, any form of distress. Like I had a lot of disgust around my OCD fears, right? And all of those emotions, like you said, lead you to feeling like I will do anything to get rid of this. And our natural instinct as humans is to run away, to avoid, to do something to compulsively calm it down, right? So what do we do instead? Let's talk a little bit about therapy. Why is that, even though it's the intuitive choice, not actually what helps us?
So the most common form of therapy that most people think about when they think about therapy is talk therapy.
Right.
Where you talk with a therapist through your problems. In many cases, I mean, I don't want to generalize, but in many cases, that's not actually that helpful for OCD and can even make it worse. We know what works. We have a really good understanding, thankfully, when it comes to therapy and medication, what kind of strategies really work for OCD. And we know that what works best is exposure response prevention therapy. That's what it's called. And it can be uncomfortable. It can be scary, especially when it's first laid out for you. I remember the first time my therapist explained it to me, I was like, I am out on that, but thank you.
Yep, good idea. That's cute.
Yeah,
absolutely not.
Yeah, lovely.
Yeah,
no, that's going to be a hard no for me. And even in the book I wrote about OCD turtles all the way down, the main character is like, that's a hard no for me at first. But eventually she gets to a point where she just understands that she has to try it. For me, it was hard to get over the barrier of exposure response therapy, the idea of it, which is to slowly in manageable ways engage with those fears and be near them and be uncomfortable,
Right.
and then realize that I could be uncomfortable and still be okay. And that, in the same way that OCD shrinks your world, that began to grow my world. And my world got bigger and bigger and bigger until my world felt like it was mine again, and my life felt like it was mine again.
Beautifully said. Yeah, I remember when I first started ERP, I didn't really have hope that it would work for me. I knew the statistics. I knew it was considered first-line therapy or first-line treatment and intervention along with medication. But I was like, yeah, that'll work for everyone besides me, right? The common, like, I'm the exception to the rule that OCD loves to pull. And I remember the day that I had my first win in therapy, and I just felt that little ounce of freedom of like, my world is a little bit bigger, and the way that just kept compounding.
Yeah.
But it is counterintuitive. It doesn't feel like our natural response to want to face those fears head on. But as we know, there's kind of two things that happen when we're going through exposure and response prevention therapy. One is habituation. The distress goes down over time, and we actually are able to sit through it and learn new things. Our brain is able to get new information aside from just our own thoughts and kind of disprove itself without just talking it out, right? Through behavior is how we learn, right? And then the second thing is we learn to tolerate. We learn to tolerate that distress. And that is a human skill that extends beyond ERP. I always say, like, there's still traffic even after you're done with ERP.
Right.
In other words, there's still distressors that,
Yeah.
distressors, is that a term?
Yeah,
distressors
absolutely.
that come up.
But when you're standing in line at the grocery store and the person in front of you has some kind of complexity that means that you're standing in line in the grocery store for like 7 minutes, I use
Yes.
ERP style thinking and behaviors in that moment, because you're right. Like, it's helpful for the overall approach to dealing with unpleasantness or stressors in the world.
Well, and I want to underline there isn't a cure to OCD, right?
Yeah.
So how is what you just described, like, why is it worth it to go through something like exposure and response prevention? What does managing your OCD look like daily?
For me, it looks exactly like you say, managing. I still have OCD. I still sometimes have to go back to therapy, or, I go to a therapist regularly, but I sometimes have to go through specific ERP stuff in order to deal with a reappearing or a new obsessive thought spiral. But managing it gets easier over time, not harder. And the biggest thing that I gain is time and a sense of my life back. So instead of losing hours every day, I'm getting my time back, and I'm getting my feeling that this life is mine back. That, like, my life, my body especially, is mine and is wholly integrated into myself in a way that was just impossible to me to think when I was really sick.
Did you have the experience of not realizing how much time you were losing to OCD until you went through therapy?
Yeah.
Because I did.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had first off, I just thought that this was like a normal, inevitable part of being me.
Yeah, but everyone else could deal with it probably better, right? It's like,
absolutely.
they have something figured out, I don't, but still, what you gonna do?
Right.
Right?
So absolutely, I 100% did not understand how much time I was losing until I stopped losing it. And then I was like, oh, I could have written a bunch of books in the time that I spent Googling or either asking for reassurance or stopping myself from asking for reassurance, or thinking about stopping myself, or
just policing the thoughts. Just playing this game of always trying to control it.
And just having to live with those thoughts. They're so freaking loud. They're so loud. They're so insistent. And I just felt powerless before them. I really did. It really did feel like I wasn't the captain of the ship of my consciousness. It felt like somebody else was running the show, which is its own form of terror and dread.
Yeah.
And I think also I felt a lot of shame. I felt like I'm the only person in the world who has this incredible weirdness, and it's embarrassing. And I remember my psychiatrist said to me once, I was like confessing something that to me was so shameful about my OCD. So like just that I was dreading to tell him. And without missing a beat, he was like, that's not unusual.
Yeah.
And it's really not. I mean, OCD is pretty common, and it expresses itself in many different ways. And it's pretty hard to surprise these well-trained therapists.
Yes. Yeah, it makes sense that it grabs onto things that are taboo in nature that feel so shameful. Like you never want to say it out loud. Like there were times where OCD put me in dangerous situations and I was like, I can never tell anyone about this because it doesn't make sense cognitively. We know it doesn't make sense on paper, right? But the emotion is so strong. And so it makes sense that it latches on to so many topics that bring up such feelings of distress, but also I've seen that firsthand working here at NOCD, talking with our therapists. There's not a lot that surprises them. Like there's not a lot that you could ever say. No intrusive thoughts I've ever really heard of that I didn't dabble in at some point, right? So tell us a little bit more about what therapy looks like. What can people expect when they start something like ERP, and where can they find something like that?
So in order to get really good ERP, you need a specially trained therapist who has a lot of experience working in ERP, who's been trained in ERP. And I think that's really important. And that's one of the reasons I'm really proud to partner with NOCD, because NOCD works with therapists who have very specific training around ERP. You're not getting matched with a therapist, you're getting matched with an OCD therapist. And that's very, very different, and I think a really important distinction. They make it safe for you, which is really important, and they make it baby steps. So, exposure means exposure to your fears, exposure to your anxieties, but in little ways that make it manageable so that you can start to feel your world get bigger and better.
I love that you said baby steps, because I know when I first started ERP, I thought I was just going to be thrown in the deep end.
Yeah.
And really, we're building it in a hierarchy. We're doing one step at a time.
Yeah.
Where, when I was talking about my biggest fears, I was like, there will never, ever be a day I can do that. But by the time I'm up there, by the time I've taken all the steps, it's just one more step. It's just one more thing to do.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a really important thing for people to know.
Yeah, so I'll give you a specific example of this. I had a really intense fear of bacteria and being exposed to bacteria, which is kind of embarrassingly classic. I wish that I could give you something that's a little less, like a little more off the wall, but that's just where I was at the time. And I mean, now I could like stick my finger in a bacterial culture and be fine. I mean, it might be uncomfortable, but I'd be fine.
Yeah.
Of course I couldn't do that then,
Right.
And so the idea of a bacterial culture growing like anywhere in a room that I was in was terrifying, because like, what if it traveled to me on the wind, on the air? What if it spilled? What if anything?
Right.
Like visible colonies of bacteria was utterly, utterly terrifying to me. But to get up to a place over a long period of time, over months, many months, to get up to a place where I could not just like be in the room with something that I knew was like an actively growing bacterial colony, but like look at it and be like, wow, that's amazing. Like this is staph and that's E. coli, and you can like see how they grow at different rates and not want to die.
Right.
Is amazing.
Yeah.
And so you get there, but you get there through slow baby steps.
Yeah. And I love that example you gave of just like, it wasn't that you got to go do this crazy thing after going through ERP. It was everyday life that you got to manage, right? Like I think sometimes people think they have to be in such severe distress in order to seek help at all. But really some of my favorite wins, some of the things that are most important to me are things like, I used to not go to the grocery store because I was worried I wouldn't be like perfectly cheery. And what if I hurt someone's feelings because I didn't smile right? And then what if they went home and hurt themselves and it was my fault? And just being able to go to the grocery store and not smile at every single person I pass is the greatest liberty of all. Like it is so liberating to be able just to live life. And I love that example of like, you just get to exist in the world where there is bacteria, that is so much of what ERP is about. It's just about being able to be a little bit more in the driver's seat of your own life.
Yeah, and to be, as you say, to be able to live in the world, right?
Yeah.
Like, and for so long, my experience of the world was like filtered through a sieve, so that I wasn't able to like even participate in a conversation like this one, really, because we'd be having the conversation, and then everything that you would say would be filtered through this series of thoughts I would have to have about whether we were good,
Yeah.
you know, like whether you are okay with me, whether I've done something terrible to you, whether I've embarrassed myself, whether I've said something so thoroughly cancelable that like you'll never forgive me, whatever. And it slowed down the conversation to the point where, you know, like I remember in high school, a lot of my friends would be like, or one of my friends specifically, and not in an ungenerous way, was like, I notice, man, that like when people tell a joke, you laugh half a second late. And I know you're quick-witted. Like, I know that it's not like taking you a second to get the joke. Like, what do you think that is? And I couldn't tell him, but I knew exactly what it was.
Huh. Yeah. Yeah, I love that description of the filters that you have to go through. I wouldn't be here having this conversation either. Like I would be, did I look at you weird? Did I creep you out maybe? Or what if I, just suddenly said a slur or said something so horrendous and I forgot about it? And oh my goodness, well, how bad would that be? And what would you be thinking?
Maybe I did say something. That's another thing that I would do. Like how do I know for sure I didn't say something?
Yeah.
And so like one of the checking behaviors that I've used over the years is like actually like using voice memos to like record myself in a conversation so that I can listen back to it and make sure that it's okay.
Right.
And that takes hours.
Yeah.
That's exhausting.
Yeah.
It's hard work and it's just painful. And so to me, to be liberated from that, which is what it really feels like, is amazing. Now, I still have OCD. I'm still vulnerable to that stuff. I still get sick. I still have periods where I'm not doing well. And that can be really frustrating. And I wish that I could like magically emerge from this and like have, be on the other side of it. But instead, it's more about managing it than it is about expecting to someday be like magically healed. Right. But I know now that I can manage it. And so if I start to fall down one of those rabbit holes, I know that I can say, okay, well, I know what to do now.
Yeah. Yeah, we nickname OCD the doubt disorder because it makes you doubt everything, like your memory, your moral character, the very integrity of your being. Like you can doubt everything and there will always be doubts in life. That doesn't go away, right? We will be lifelong, people who manage OCD. But there is a difference between suffering from OCD and managing it. Right. There is a difference between choosing into a lifestyle that gives you freedom by focusing on your behavior, which is the part of the condition you get to control. You can't control the thoughts, you can't control the distress. Again, we often see those die down as you work on the behavior piece. But at the end of the day, we don't have control over what pops in our head, and we're exposed to so many things and so much more content and media. There's always going to be no shortage of things for OCD to latch onto, right? So instead of trying to control that, we get to focus on the behavior. And that looks like showing up, having conversations, getting to connect with people, and really just getting to live your life despite the OCD.
Yeah, getting to have the rich, full life that everyone deserves. And I mean, I personify OCD a little bit too much sometimes. I think I anthropomorphize it a little bit, but like it wants something different from what I want for myself. Yeah. And I'm the captain of the ship, and I get to decide, like you said, I don't get to decide everything. I don't get to decide my thoughts. Sure don't get to decide my thoughts, but I do get to decide. I have a lot more say in my behaviors and my reactions to those thoughts than I used to.
Yeah. I like personifying OCD. I think it's a great coping skill we use in therapy. I often like to describe it like before OCD was driving my car and I just was along for the ride.
Yeah.
Like, take me where you want. And now I'm in the driver's seat and it sure is a backseat driver. It sure kicks my chair and tries to tell me where to go and yells at me that I've made the wrong choice and blah, 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 blah. But it doesn't get to touch the wheel, right?
Right.
It does not get to touch the wheel. So it gets to be there. I invite it to. I buckle it up, right? But it's not touching the wheel. And I think that's a really important thing for people to know that therapy can bring them, is that freedom to drive where they want to go. If there is someone out there who's maybe feeling like they they aren't deserving of that life, or maybe it's not that bad for them, or all of these reasons that we discussed can sometimes be barriers to getting proper treatment. What do you want them to know?
I think the two most important things are, number one, you're not alone. OCD can be really good at making you feel like you're alone, but you're not. And number two, there is hope. OCD is actually very treatable. And one of the reasons I'm really proud to partner with NOCD is that they work with specially trained therapists who understand OCD and know how to treat it. You're not being matched with a therapist, you're being matched with an OCD specific therapist. And that can make all the difference, I think. So that to me is the most important thing. But of course, also it can be really difficult to access treatment. And another thing I like about NOCD is that they work with so many insurance plans. And so a variety of people can get access to treatment. It can be very difficult to navigate the American healthcare system, as we all know. But I really like the way that NOCD makes it easier. So if you're concerned that you might have OCD, or you know that you do, and you're looking for treatment, please know that there is hope, and you can go to nocd.com to learn more.
Beautifully said. Thanks for being here. Thanks for having this discussion. I hope people watching can feel just a little bit of that sense of hope. I hope that if they leave with anything from this video, it is knowing they are not alone, and that there is therapy out there that can hopefully help put them back in the driver's seat.
Yeah, well, it's really great to be with you, Tia. It's always a joy. It's always fun to hang out with someone else who has OCD.
So
I
great.
feel like I'm with my tribe.
Yes,
so thank you.
100%.